grew heavy with the scent of pine and forbidden desire as his lips brushed the hollow of my throat. A whisper of heat that set my skin ablaze. I, Clara Bennett, at 63, stood rigid against the cold glass of the French doors, my silver hair tumbling loose from its pins, my breath fogging the pain in the dim glow of the chandelier. Owen, my stepson, just 26, pressed closer, his lean frame trembling with restraint, his green eyes dark with a longing that mirrored my own. The snow-laden forest beyond the Colorado Lodge glowed under the moonlight, casting eerie shadows across the room, while my husband, James, slept upstairs, his labored breathing a distant echo of the life we'd lost. Owen's hand slid to my waist, his fingers tentative yet possessive, and I arched toward him, my silk robe slipping to reveal the curve of my collarbone, my heart a wild drumbeat of guilt and yearning. The world narrowed to this moment, until a sharp crack of wood split the silence, and I jolted back, my pulse roaring, as the weight of our near transgression crashed over me like an avalanche. This was no fleeting impulse. It was a chasm, and I teetered on its brink, my soul torn between ecstasy and ruin. I staggered to the leather sofa, my legs weak, the fabric cool against my fevered skin as I sank into it. Owen remained by the doors, his chest heaving, his hands clenched, as if battling the same tempest within me. The firelight flickered across his sharp features, high cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, making him appear both youthful and hauntingly mature. "Clara," he whispered, his voice a low tremor that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't mean to, but his words dissolved, the air between us thick with an unspoken truth that pulsed like a living thing. I pressed a hand to my lips, tasting the ghost of his breath, the memory of his touch searing into my flesh. The lodge was silent now, save for the faint whistle of wind through the pines, but the tension coiled tighter, a thread about to snap. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned. At 63, I was a woman of quiet dignity, the wife of James Bennett, a former diplomat whose name once commanded respect in Washington's corridors. Our lodge, nestled in the Rockies, was a retreat built on decades of shared dreams. Its stone fireplace, vaulted ceilings, and panoramic windows, a testament to our past. James had given me stability, a life of privilege, and a reputation as the poised hostess of DC's elite. But he'd also given me solitude, a cold, creeping void that had widened with his recent stroke, leaving him frail and distant, my skin still soft despite the creases at my eyes, and my figure, rounded but graceful, had once drawn glances, but now, just by the man who shared my bed. I filled my days with knitting by the fire, hosting winter gatherings, and staring at the mountains, but the emptiness gnawed at me, a silent lament I'd learned to bear. Owen changed that. He'd returned home 3 months ago, after finishing his environmental studies degree, his presence a disruption to the stillness I'd cultivated. At first, he was just a shadow, James's son from his first marriage, a lanky boy who'd left for college years ago. But now, sketching by the window or chopping wood outside, he was a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that set my nerves ablaze. The way his chestnut hair fell over his brow, the way his hands moved with care over his maps, the way his gaze lingered on me during our talks. It stirred something I'd buried deep. I told myself it was familial warmth, a flicker of pride. But the truth was a wildfire, smoldering beneath my restraint. It began innocently. One frosty morning, I found him outside, splitting logs, his breath visible in the crisp air. I brought him a mug of cocoa, the steam curling upward, and he turned, flashing a smile that made my chest tighten. "Thanks, Clara," he said, his voice deep and warm, taking the mug with a nod. "Call me by my name," I replied, surprised by the softness in my tone. From that day, our interactions deepened. He'd bring me sketches of the forest trails, his hands smudged with pencil, placing them on the table with a shy grin. "Thought you might like this," he'd say, and I'd linger, tracing the lines, imagining his touch. The tension built like a storm, gathering over the peaks, slow and inevitable. One evening, as snow began to fall, I found him in the study, poring over a book by the fire. His sweater hugged his frame, revealing the definition of his shoulders, and the sight sent a shiver through me. I should have retreated, but instead I called out, "Owen, need company." He looked up, his eyes catching mine, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. He patted the chair beside him, and I sat, the wood creaking under me, his knee brushing mine with intent. The touch was a spark, and I felt my body awakening with a heat I'd suppressed for years. Over the next weeks, the boundaries blurred. He'd find excuses to be near, carrying logs to the hearth, adjusting the blinds in the parlor, always with that knowing look. I began anticipating his presence, the way his voice deepened when he said my name, the way his gaze seemed to peel back the years and see me as more than James's wife. One snowy afternoon, I was curled up by the window, a shawl over my shoulders, when he appeared with a tray of tea and biscuits. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting it down, his eyes never leaving mine. The steam rose from the cup, mingling with the sharp scent of snow, and I felt a pang of something, longing, perhaps, or regret for what might have been. The psychology of it plagued me. I'd read articles on taboo attractions, on the allure of youth, on the complex dynamics of stepfamily desire. Was I seeking escape, a rebellion against James's fading presence, or was it something deeper, a recognition of Owen's vitality, a mirror to the passion I'd lost? I told myself it was harmless, a fleeting temptation, but my body disagreed. Every time he was near, my pulse quickened, my skin prickled with awareness. I caught myself watching him, memorizing the curve of his lips, the strength in his hands as he worked, the way his silence spoke volumes. The turning point came 6 weeks ago. James had retreated to his room early, his mind clouded by medication, and I wandered downstairs, restless. Owen was there, stoking the fire, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his forearms corded with muscle. The sight stole my breath, and when he noticed me, he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "you look beautiful tonight." The compliment, so bold yet so tender, unraveled me. I stepped closer, the rug soft beneath my slippers, and murmured, "Thank you, Owen. You're too kind." His eyes darkened, and the space between us shrank, until I could feel the heat radiating from him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed in the vast bed I shared with James, the sheets cool against my skin, my mind replaying every moment with Owen. The lodge was quiet, save for the distant howl of wind, and I rose, padding barefoot to the study for a glass of sherry. As I poured, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, and turned to find Owen in the doorway, his hair tousled, his chest bare beneath an open shirt. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice a whisper in the firelight. I nodded, my throat dry, and he stepped closer, the air thickening with tension. "Clara," he said, his hand reaching for mine, "I've been wanting to tell you something." My heart pounded as his fingers closed around mine, warm and firm, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my lips brushing his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question, but when he responded, it deepened into something wild, something I couldn't control. We pulled apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his breath hot against my skin, "but I can't stop feeling this." The confession hung between us, heavy with possibility, and I knew then that I was lost. Over the next days, we stole moments, his hand grazing mine as he passed me a log, a lingering look across the dining room, a brush of his lips against my cheek when he brought me coffee. Each touch fueled the fire, each glance a promise of more. Tonight, though, had pushed us to the edge. I'd been unable to sleep, the lodge's silence oppressive, and descended to the parlor in my robe, seeking the fire's warmth. Owen was there, adding logs, and our eyes met. The air shifted, charged with months of unspoken desire, and before I could think, he was crossing the room, his hands on my shoulders, his lips grazing my throat. The near kiss was a storm, wild and unrestrained, and I leaned into it, my hands clutching his shirt, until that crack, that gasp, forced us apart. I sank onto the sofa, my mind a whirl, as Owen stepped back, his expression a mix of longing and guilt. The confrontation loomed. James's footsteps descended, slow and unsteady, and he appeared in the doorway, his robe askew, his eyes wide with shock. "Clara," he rasped, his voice frail but accusing. "What is this?" I froze, Owen's hand slipping from mine, and the world shattered. James's gaze, usually so vacant, burned with betrayal, and I felt the weight of my actions crash down. "James," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos, "this isn't what you think." But the lie tasted hollow, and his laugh, weak and bitter, cut through me. "Don't lie," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen the way he watches you, the way you've changed." The hours that followed were a tempest. James accused me of months of deceit, his voice rising with each revelation. How he'd noticed my distracted air, my late-night wanderings, the way the lodge pulsed with life when he slept. I countered with my own truths, the years of his withdrawal, the void he'd left me to fill. In a moment of raw honesty, I admitted it. "Yes, James, I felt something for Owen, but you drove me to this, your absence, your illness." His face paled, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd loved broken by my words. The fallout was inevitable. James demanded separation, his pride wounded, and I retreated to the guest room, the lodge a prison of my own making. Owen sought me out, his eyes filled with concern, and knelt beside me. "Clara, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his hand on mine. I looked at him, this young man who'd reawakened me, and felt a surge of resolve. "No," I said, my voice firm. "This is my choice." The legal proceedings began, a quiet scandal that rippled through Colorado's elite. James took his name, his legacy, leaving me the lodge and a modest sum, a hollow victory tinged with liberation. Owen stayed, not as a stepson, but as my partner. The whispers followed: cheating wife, taboo lover, but his presence silenced them. We redesigned the lodge together, his hands on the plans, mine on the gardens, and the snow-capped peaks stood witness to our rebirth. The psychology of our love, age-defying norms, desire-defying duty, taught me that passion knows no bounds. At 63, I'd found a second dawn, and as Owen kissed me by the fire, the world felt whole again.